What if the moment that made you famous wasn't the moment that defined you? And what if the greatest voice on Britain's Got Talent lost, not to another singer, but to a dancing dog? It sounds almost absurd when you say it out loud. A teenage tenor compared to Pavarotti, beaten by a novelty act. But life rarely follows the script we imagine. Sometimes the trophy isn't the prize. Sometimes losing is the beginning. For many of us watching that season back in 2012, Jonathan Antoine was unforgettable. A shy, visibly nervous 17-year-old walked onto the stage beside 16-year-old Charlotte Jaconelli. They introduced themselves simply as Jonathan and Charlotte, a classical crossover duo from Essex. The judges looked skeptical. The camera cut to Simon Cowell. A faint smirk. A raised eyebrow. A half-whispered remark suggesting the audition might be a disaster. The audience shifted in their seats. It was the familiar setup for a reality television punchline. Awkward teenagers, misplaced confidence, inevitable humiliation. Jonathan avoided eye contact. His shoulders were slightly hunched, as if trying to make himself smaller beneath the stage lights. Years of being stared at had taught him that attention rarely meant kindness. Then the music began. And Jonathan opened his mouth. The first notes of The Prayer didn't just fill the theater, they froze it. Something electric moved through the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Smirks disappeared. Even the judges' pens hovered motionless above their notes. Within seconds, curiosity turned into disbelief. By the time he reached the soaring climax, the audience was no longer evaluating, they were witnessing. The shy teenager who moments earlier seemed overwhelmed by the spotlight now commanded it. His voice was rich, controlled, impossibly mature. It carried weight and vulnerability in equal measure. When the final note faded, there was a split second of stunned silence, then an eruption. A standing ovation. Tears in the crowd. Judges on their feet. Cowell, who had doubted him moments earlier, compared the teenager to Pavarotti. Overnight, Jonathan went from bullied schoolboy to global viral sensation. Millions watched the clip. Headlines exploded. Morning shows booked interviews. Radio stations replayed the performance. Social media buzzed with disbelief. But fame is a strange beast. It amplifies everything, the praise and the pressure. And yet, he didn't win. In the final, Jonathan and Charlotte came second to Ashley and Pudsey, a dancing dog act. Think about that. One of the most extraordinary young tenor voices in decades, beaten by a routine built around choreography and charm. At the time, many viewers asked, did Britain get it wrong? Or was this setback the very thing that set him free? Because here's the twist most people forget. Within 24 hours of the finale, Simon Cowell signed them to a £1 million record deal with Psycho. They hadn't taken the trophy, but they'd secured something arguably more valuable: industry backing. The narrative shifted almost instantly. They weren't runners-up. They were rising stars. Their debut album, Together, climbed to number 5 in the UK charts and sold hundreds of thousands of copies. Classical crossover audiences embraced them. Families who had watched that first audition now bought the CD for Christmas gifts. They toured internationally, performing in grand theaters Jonathan once only imagined entering as a spectator. ITV aired specials. They sang for packed arenas. Fans, calling themselves the Fantoins, created online communities, fan art, and dedicated forums. For many, Jonathan wasn't just a singer. He was proof that talent could silence cruelty. But behind the applause, cracks were forming. Fame accelerates everything: growth, change, tension. Jonathan was drawn deeply toward classical opera. He wanted to immerse himself in Puccini and Verdi, in technical discipline and tradition. Charlotte leaned toward musical theater and contemporary crossover. She loved storytelling through Broadway melodies and modern arrangements. They were teenagers navigating global fame, contracts, expectations, and their own evolving identities. During the original audition, Cowell had suggested Jonathan might one day go solo. At the time, it felt almost cruel. Why plant division in the middle of triumph? But was it foresight? When you're 17, friendship feels permanent. Success feels shared. The idea of separation feels like betrayal. In February 2014, The duo announced they were splitting. Both had been offered solo deals with Sony Classical. Publicly, they framed it as a natural evolution. Privately, it marked the end of a chapter that had defined their adolescence. Fans were heartbroken. The Fantoins had invested emotionally in the partnership. They had watched two shy teenagers walk into a national spotlight together. They had believed in the chemistry. Rumors swirled. Were they ever romantically involved? Both denied it repeatedly. They described each other as friends, almost siblings. But public curiosity rarely respects boundaries. Still, after the split, contact faded. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Just gradually, like two roads that once ran parallel but slowly curve in different directions. Now here's the deeper question. Was Jonathan prepared to stand alone, not just musically, but emotionally? To understand that, you have to go back much further. Jonathan Antoine was born in 1995 in Essex. His childhood wasn't marked by applause. It was marked by bullying, starting as early as age 4. He was targeted for his weight, his appearance, his differences. For a sensitive child with artistic inclinations, school corridors can feel like battlegrounds. Children can be ruthless without fully understanding the damage they inflict. Words become labels. Labels become identities. For Jonathan, teasing didn't just hurt, it shaped his inner world. He withdrew. He internalized. He learned to anticipate laughter before it arrived. Food became comfort. Music became sanctuary. Imagine being 11 years old and already understanding that your safest place is inside a song. That when you sing, no one can interrupt you. No one can mock the tone of your voice. Instead, they listen. At West Hatch High School, he met vocal coach Jenny Ewington. She recognized what others had missed, an extraordinary instrument hidden inside a wounded child. She didn't just teach technique. She offered belief. Under her guidance, Jonathan began performing pieces like Panis Angelicus and Where is Love? He learned breath control, posture, phrasing. But perhaps more importantly, he learned confidence. At 14, he auditioned for London's top music conservatories, and was accepted by all 4. He chose the Royal Academy of Music's junior program. Consider the contrast. The boy mocked in school corridors, now walking through the halls of one of Britain's most prestigious institutions. What does that do to a teenager's sense of identity? Does it heal old wounds, or simply cover them with achievement? At a 2010 music festival, he scored 98 out of 100, the highest mark in its history. Let that sink in. The boy who had been mocked for standing out was now being celebrated for the very thing that made him different. So when BGT happened, it wasn't a miracle. It was preparation meeting opportunity. But preparation doesn't immunize you against pressure. In October 2014, Jonathan released his debut solo album, Tenore. The pressure was immense. Would audiences embrace him without Charlotte? Would critics dismiss him as a reality TV novelty? Would the public tire of the narrative? He stepped into recording studios not as half of a duo, but as the sole focal point. Every note was his responsibility. Every review, personal. They didn't dismiss him. Tenore went to #1 on the classical artist chart. He became the youngest tenor ever to achieve that milestone. It even cracked the mainstream pop charts. Placido Domingo personally invited him to perform at the iTunes Festival. Think about that invitation. A living legend acknowledging a young artist not as a curiosity, but as a colleague. Jonathan toured the United States. He performed at the Muhammad Ali Celebrity Fight Night. He stood beneath chandeliers and spotlights in venues far grander than the school auditoriums where he first sang. He released further albums, Believe in 2016 and Going the Distance in 2020, recorded with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. He tackled Nessun Dorma, one of the most demanding arias in the repertoire. It is a song that has humbled seasoned professionals. Jonathan didn't merely attempt it, he inhabited it. His voice had matured, darkened, strengthened. On paper, it was a triumph. But success does not erase trauma. Jonathan has spoken openly about being diagnosed with acute depression around the time of his BGT rise. The pressure, combined with years of bullying, became overwhelming. Fame can amplify insecurities rather than silence them. When millions praise you, a single negative comment can still echo louder. He had to cancel a performance at the Royal Albert Hall due to mental health struggles. Imagine achieving your dream, standing on stages you once only dreamed of, and still feeling broken inside. What does applause mean when your mind is at war with itself? He also described being in a deeply unhealthy relationship in his late teens, one that compounded his emotional strain. Love, at that age, can feel all-consuming. When it turns toxic, it can erode self-worth further. During this period, his family, his parents and sister, became his anchor. Behind every public figure is a private support system rarely seen. Late-night conversations. Reassurance. Reminders of who you were before headlines. Jonathan began speaking more candidly about body image. In a world obsessed with appearance, classical music can still carry rigid expectations. He made the decision to prioritize health, not for aesthetics, but for longevity and well-being. Weight loss followed, but more importantly, so did perspective. He trained not only his voice, but his resilience. The transformation wasn't overnight. It wasn't a reality show montage set to uplifting music. It was gradual. Therapy sessions. Honest conversations. Moments of doubt. Moments of clarity. And through it all, the question lingered, who is Jonathan Antoine without the viral clip? Without the comparison to Pavarotti? Without the narrative of bullied boy turned sensation? Identity forged in public can feel fragile. Yet something shifted as he moved into his 20s. Interviews revealed a calmer, more self-assured artist. He no longer seemed defined by the shock factor of that first audition. He spoke about craft, discipline, the long arc of a career. He had stopped chasing validation and started chasing mastery. There's a quiet power in that transition. Because perhaps the most compelling part of Jonathan's story isn't the standing ovation. It isn't the record deal. It isn't even the loss to a dancing dog. It's the resilience. It's the decision to continue, through depression, through scrutiny, through reinvention. It's the understanding that losing a television competition did not mean losing his destiny. Ask yourself, if Jonathan had won Britain's Got Talent, would the narrative have felt complete? Would he have been boxed into a tidy success story? Did coming second grant him something unexpected, the freedom to grow without the burden of being the official champion? Sometimes, second place removes a target from your back. Today, Jonathan continues to perform internationally, refining his artistry. His voice has deepened with age, carrying both technical precision and lived experience. When he sings now, there's an added layer, a maturity shaped by struggle. The shy teenager who once stood under harsh audition lights has become a seasoned performer who understands the stage as both platform and privilege. But perhaps the most powerful evolution is internal. He is no longer simply the bullied boy with the big voice. He is not just the runner-up. He is not defined by a viral clip or a judge's comparison. He is an artist who endured public doubt, private pain, and professional reinvention, and kept singing. And maybe that's the real victory. So the next time you think about that season of Britain's Got Talent, ask yourself, was the dancing dog truly the winner? Or was the real triumph quieter, slower, unfolding over years instead of weeks? What if the moment that made him famous wasn't the moment that defined him at all? What if losing was the beginning of becoming? Jonathan Antoine's story isn't the kind of story you can capture in a single performance. He was 14 when he first appeared on that stage, a boy with a voice too large for his small frame, carrying both immense talent and immense vulnerability. While the cameras panned to the cheering crowd and judges' applause, Jonathan was internally wrestling with a truth most of us don't see. The world had always been a little too loud, a little too fast for him. The bright lights, the swelling music, the cheering audience, these were both exhilarating and overwhelming. Yet he sang, because in that moment, the song became his armor, and the stage, a fleeting sanctuary. Rather than hide his struggles, Jonathan chose to speak about them. He became an advocate for mental health awareness, using his voice to give courage to those who felt invisible. He co-authored children's books addressing bullying, telling stories that mirrored his own painful experiences. The boy who once felt powerless began helping others find strength. Could a voice really do more than entertain? Could it also heal? For Jonathan, the answer was a resounding yes. Then came another revelation. In 2022, shortly after turning 27, Jonathan was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. When he shared it publicly, he described it as recontextualizing a life already lived. Suddenly, many pieces fell into place. The social difficulties that had always puzzled him, the intense, laser-like focus on music, the subtle feeling of being slightly out of sync with the world. The diagnosis didn't erase the past, it reframed it. For many adults diagnosed later in life, there's a complex mixture of relief and grief. Relief at finally understanding yourself, at having a name for the way your mind works. Grief for the years spent wondering why you didn't fit in, for the friendships that were difficult, the misunderstandings, the misjudged behaviors. For Jonathan, embracing the diagnosis was transformative. Rather than seeing it as a limitation, he described it as insight. His brain wasn't flawed, it was different. It was uniquely suited to his craft, attuned to the intricacies of music in a way others could only admire from afar. And then, something else changed. Between 2020 and 2024, Jonathan underwent a dramatic physical transformation. Over those 4 years, he lost more than 70 pounds, a change he credits not to fad diets or quick fixes, but to consistent daily walking, 10,000 steps almost without fail, along with managing a thyroid condition and reshaping his relationship with food. He spoke often of discipline, but also of self-compassion. This wasn't about image. It was about health, about reclaiming control over a body that had often felt like a source of insecurity. Have you ever noticed how midlife, or even your 20s, can become a season of reckoning? A moment where you look in the mirror and decide whether you will drift, or deliberately change. For Jonathan, that reckoning came early. By 2024, he appeared slimmer, stronger, and more self-assured. But the external transformation was only part of the story. More significant was the quiet steadiness he had cultivated within, the calm resilience that now informed every note he sang, every choice he made. Those who had seen him as fragile or delicate on that TV stage now witnessed a young man in command of himself, his craft, and his destiny. As of 2026, Jonathan continues recording and touring. His single All of Me reimagines John Legend's hit through a classical lens, blending technical precision with emotional depth. His upcoming album, Speaking to You, promises to marry operatic training with contemporary resonance, offering listeners a bridge between genres that feels both familiar and groundbreaking. His Christmas release, Christmasland, added another layer to his catalog, showcasing his versatility and warmth. His estimated net worth sits around $4 million, not bad for someone once dismissed on stage, but wealth has never defined him. What matters more is the life he has carefully built, one that reflects authenticity, resilience, and a deep connection to others. Charlotte, meanwhile, transitioned into West End musical theater. Their paths diverged, and contact remains limited, a quiet reminder that not every partnership lasts, but every chapter contributes to the story of growth. But here's what makes Jonathan Antoine's story compelling, especially for those of us beyond the teenage years. It isn't about instant fame. It's about endurance. It's about a child bullied at 4 who didn't let cruelty define his worth. It's about a young man publicly doubted, then publicly validated. It's about losing a televised competition and winning a career. It's about discovering, in adulthood, that your differences have a name, and that name brings clarity, not shame. It's about confronting depression rather than hiding it. And it's about understanding that transformation, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, is possible long after the spotlight fades. Jonathan's story asks us to reconsider what it really means to win. Is a trophy the pinnacle, or is the quiet persistence, the courage to continue despite setbacks, the true measure of triumph? How many of us came second in something that felt like everything at the time? A missed promotion. A failed relationship. An opportunity that slipped through our fingers. And how many of those losses quietly redirected us towards something better suited to who we were becoming? The boy who once feared judgment, the teen who trembled on a stage under the gaze of millions, and the adult who painstakingly reclaimed his body, mind, and purpose, all of them are Jonathan Antoine. Each stage of his life builds upon the last, not with the sharp immediacy of television applause, but with a lasting weight of personal growth. Jonathan didn't just survive Britain's Got Talent. He survived childhood bullying, industry pressure, public scrutiny, mental health battles, and the long journey towards self-understanding. His voice may have launched his career, but resilience built his life. And perhaps that's the real standing ovation. So the next time you witness someone's success, consider this. How much of what you see is the product of a single moment, and how much is the culmination of years of quiet struggle, self-discovery, and relentless determination? How many voices have been tempered by hardship, only to shine brighter because of it? Jonathan Antoine reminds us that life is not always about the obvious victories. Sometimes, the deepest triumphs are invisible at first glance. They unfold in whispered victories, confronting anxiety before it controls you, finding joy in a step forward when the world expects a leap, choosing kindness over bitterness when life has handed you cruelty. And maybe that's what we should be celebrating more often. The slow, steady courage it takes to become who we are meant to be, long after the cameras have stopped rolling and the applause has faded.